In a live-streamed internal court hearing, a police officer notorious for violence publicly assaulted an unassuming woman. His brutal kick was not just shocking, it was the catalyst for a spectacular reversal. As the resilient woman rose and revealed her true identity, he froze, utterly stunned. Brace yourself for a story of shocking revelations and ultimate justice. He kicked her in court, then froze when she showed her badge. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow on the faces of the public. Their expressions a mix of anticipation and judgment. A live television crew, positioned strategically, ensured every angle of the internal police hearing would be broadcast. Turning a routine disciplinary action into a public spectacle, Chief Cassandra Ward sat among the observers, a figure of quiet anonymity in a plain dark suit. Her new appointment as chief was only weeks old, a fact still whispered about in the city, especially among the old guard. She was black, sharp, and intent on reform, a triple threat to a system designed to protect its own. Today, she was just another citizen, or so everyone thought. The hearing commenced. Officer Brent Lawson, a hulking figure in a pressed uniform, stood before the panel. His reputation preceded him a career marred by excessive force complaints, allegations of racial profiling, and a history of physically assaulting citizens. The current charge was a brutal assault on a black teenager during a routine traffic stop, an incident captured on a civilian's cell phone that had ignited protests across the city. Lawson, a scowl etched into his face, met the gaze of the panel with open defiance, his eyes sweeping across the room, lingering on the faces of the public. He oozed contempt, a predatory awareness in his stare that made several spectators shift uncomfortably. Cassandra watched him, her gaze unwavering. She had studied his file, every incident, every dismissed complaint. She knew the pattern. Lawson's lawyer, a slick, expensive man, began his defense, painting Lawson as a dedicated officer, a victim of an overzealous public in a politically motivated department. The narrative was predictable, the usual dance of deflection and denial. Lawson, meanwhile, paced slightly, a barely contained coiled spring. He muttered under his breath, audible enough for the first few rows to catch phrases like thugs and race baiters. The tension in the room thickened, a palpable energy that the camera crew seemed to feed on. As the lawyer droned on, Lawson's eyes locked onto Cassandra. She had made no move to draw attention, yet his gaze found her, perhaps sensing something, an unfamiliar stillness in her posture, a flicker of recognition, or perhaps just raw, unadulterated animosity crossed his face. He smirked, a slow, ugly pull of his lips. The lawyer paused, a cough from the panel drawing his attention. Lawson seized the moment. With a sudden, explosive surge, he broke free from his lawyer's side, launching himself toward the rows of spectators. "This is a joke," he roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "You want to talk about assault? I'll show you assault." The public gasped, a ripple of fear spreading through the room. Security officers moved, but Lawson was faster, a blur of rage. He targeted Cassandra, a direct, unprovoked attack. His heavy boot connected with her side, a sickening thud that silenced the room. A collective cry rose from the crowd. The live broadcast captured it all: the shock, the violence, the raw, unfiltered brutality. Cassandra stumbled, catching herself before she hit the ground, her face momentarily contorted in pain. The camera zoomed in, capturing the grimace, then the sudden, fierce light that entered her eyes. Lawson, emboldened by the impact, lunged again, his fist cocked back, but Cassandra was already moving. The plain suit suddenly seemed to contain not just a woman, but a force. Her movements were fluid, precise, honed by years of training. She dodged his wild swing, her hand flashing out, catching his wrist in a grip of iron. Lawson froze, his momentum arrested, his eyes, initially alight with savage triumph, widened in disbelief. The woman he'd just kicked, the anonymous observer, was suddenly not so anonymous. Her grip tightened, a silent challenge, A ripple of confusion went through the room, then a collective murmur. The live feed zoomed in, capturing the tableau, the hulking, enraged officer, held in check by the deceptively still woman. A silent, potent shift had just occurred. The attacker had become the ensnared. The camera crew, initially disoriented by the sudden chaos, quickly recalibrated. Their lenses now focused solely on Cassandra and Lawson. The public, a collective gasp still hanging in the air, leaned forward, transfixed. Lawson struggled, his face purpling, but Cassandra's gripping was unyielding. He snarled, trying to rip his arm free, but she held him, effortlessly pivoting, using his own weight against him. The force of her counter-movement sent a jolt through his body, unbalancing him further. He stumbled, a clumsy, undignified dance that shattered his image of control. The hushed whispers in the gallery grew louder, morphing into a low hum of disbelief. Cassandra maintained eye contact, her expression a cool, unwavering assessment. There was no anger, no panic, only a calculated determination that chilled Lawson to the bone. He had expected a civilian, a cowering victim. Instead, he found himself facing a wall of controlled power. The panel members, initially stunned into silence, exchanged bewildered glances. The security officers, who had finally reached the scuffle, hesitated, unsure how to intervene. The scene played out in slow motion for the cameras, each second stretching, amplifying the dramatic shift in power. Lawson's bravado visibly drained from him, replaced by a dawning comprehension, a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes. He made one last desperate attempt to break free, a surge of brute force. Cassandra met it with an almost imperceptible shift of her weight, a subtle turn of her body that leveraged his own strength against him. With a sharp, decisive twist, she spun him, his arms still locked in her grasp, and brought him to his knees with a jarring thud. The sound echoed in the silent courtroom. The live feed captured Lawson's face, a mask of shock and humiliation as he knelt, subdued by the woman he had just publicly assaulted. It was a moment of stark reversal, a visual indictment of his aggression and arrogance. Then, with a deliberate, slow motion, Cassandra reached into her inner jacket pocket. Every eye in the room, including Lawson's, followed her hand. The murmurs died down completely. The television crew zoomed in, anticipation palpable. She pulled out a small, metallic object. It glinted under the harsh lights. It was a badge, a silver shield emblazoned with the city's crest and the words Chief of Police. She held it up, not to the panel, not to Lawson, but directly to the camera, to the millions watching at home. The entire courtroom erupted. A collective roar rose from the public, a mix of shock, vindication, and awe. Lawson, still on his knees, his face ashen, stared at the badge as if it were a ghost. His eyes, wide with disbelief, flickered to Cassandra's face, then back to the gleaming silver. The reality of his colossal miscalculation hit him like a physical blow. He kicked her in court, then froze when she showed her badge. The trap was sprung. The reform had just begun. This wasn't just a physical attack. It was a brazen challenge to authority, a blatant display of the impunity Lawson believed he possessed. Cassandra, now standing over him, her badge held high, transformed the courtroom into a stage for justice. Her voice, when it came, was clear and resonant, cutting through the rising clamor. "Officer Lawson," she stated, her words slow and deliberate, "you have just committed aggravated assault against a civilian, and in doing so, violated every oath you ever took. And for the benefit of everyone watching," she added, her gaze sweeping over the television cameras, "you have assaulted your chief." A wave of murmurs, then a collective gasp, swept through the public gallery. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The broadcasting team, scrambling to adjust, whispered urgently into their microphones, confirming the identity of the woman who had just subdued a rogue officer on live television. Lawson, still on his knees, slowly raised his head. His eyes, now devoid of defiance, were wide with a dawning horror. The realization of the profound error, the utter self-destruction of his act washed over him. The kick, meant to intimidate, had become the catalyst for his undoing. The silence in the room returned, heavy and electric, as the magnitude of Cassandra's revelations settled upon everyone. The panel, composed of veteran officers, now looked at each other with a mixture of shock and grim understanding. This wasn't just a disciplinary hearing anymore. It was a public execution of a corrupt career, broadcast for all to see. Cassandra motioned to the stunned security officers. "Take him," she commanded, her voice calm but firm, "and ensure he receives the appropriate charges for his actions here today." In addition to the existing investigation, the officers, snapping out of their stupor, moved quickly, seizing Lawson. He offered no resistance, his face slack with defeat. The once defiant officer, infamous for his brutal conduct, was led away, head bowed, before the unblinking eye of the cameras and the stunned gazes of the public. The courtroom was a buzzing hive of whispers and exclamations, the energy now completely inverted. The public, who had come expecting a staged procedural, had witnessed a raw, unfiltered act of justice. The news crews, their faces alight with the thrill of a breaking story, scrambled to get live reports out, the words Chief Cassandra Ward, undercover, and public assault flashing across screens nationwide. The broadcast had just secured a major, unexpected scoop. This was not just a minor incident, it was a seismic shift. The narrative had flipped. In a new era, defined by transparency and accountability, had just been brutally, publicly ushered in. The public, now fully engaged, sensed the profound implications. This was only the beginning. The courtroom remained a tempest of noise, but it was a new kind of noise, not gasps of horror, but excited shouts, indignant murmurs, and the frantic chatter of journalists. Cameras swiveled, no longer focused on the now empty defendant's stand, but on Chief Cassandra Ward. She stood tall, composed, her badge still held for a beat before she let it drop back into her pocket. The security officers, still reeling from the immediate shift in power, quickly cleared a path for her, their deference palpable. A senior panel member, Captain Eva Rossi, a woman known for her strict adherence to protocol, finally found her voice. "Chief Ward," she stammered, her face pale. This is highly unorthodox." Cassandra turned to her, her eyes sharp. "Unorthodox, captain, or necessary, what you witnessed today, what the entire city witnessed, is precisely why I was appointed." Her voice carried, clear and unyielding. A blatant act of aggression from an officer under investigation against a civilian, and now the chief of police. It confirms everything we feared about the rot within this department. The live broadcast, now cutting between Cassandra and a news anchor in a studio, was ablaze with activity. Breaking news banners flashed across the bottom of screens. New chief revealed in courtroom drama. Officer assaults police chief live on air. The public was glued to their screens, sharing snippets, uploading clips. Social media exploded. Lawson's name trended, but so did Cassandra's, her image rapidly becoming a symbol. Suddenly, an agitated field reporter, microphone thrust forward, burst through the security cordon. "Chief Ward, can you confirm reports that your appointment was part of a deeper, undercover federal investigation into systemic corruption within the city's police force?" The question hung in the air, a bombshell. The courtroom went silent again, even the panel members turning sharply towards Cassandra. This was the shocking secret. It wasn't just about today, it was about everything. Cassandra's expression remained unreadable, but a subtle shift in her posture, a slight tightening around her eyes, indicated the weight of the question. She had known this would come out, but not so immediately, not with such public fervor. This wasn't a leak, it was an eruption. Fueled by the shock waves of Lawson's public attack, the live incident had accelerated her timeline. Before she could respond, the news anchor, cutting back to the studio, spoke with urgency. We're receiving confirmed reports from federal sources close to the Department of Justice. Chief Cassandra Ward's appointment was indeed the culmination of a 2-year, highly classified federal probe, codenamed Operation Clean Slate, aimed at identifying and dismantling deeply entrenched networks of corruption within the city's law enforcement agencies. Sources indicate Chief Ward, a former federal investigator with a distinguished record, was instrumental in building these cases. Even before her official appointment as chief, the revelation hit the courtroom like a physical force. The panel members, all established figures within the department, looked visibly stunned. The undercover aspect of her current presence was just the tip of the iceberg. She hadn't just become chief, she had been inserted. The cheers from the public gallery turned into a roaring approval, a collective gasp of understanding. This wasn't just about one bad apple, it was about the entire rotten barrel. The implications were staggering. Every single officer, every internal decision, every past dismissal of complaints now came under immediate scrutiny. Cassandra finally addressed the reporter, her voice firm, carrying the full weight of the confirmed intelligence. My mission here is clear: to restore integrity and trust to this department. What was exposed today is a symptom, not the cause. We will pursue every lead, investigate every allegation, and hold every officer accountable, regardless of rank or past impunity. Her gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of the panel members, some of whom now looked distinctly uncomfortable. No one is above the law, not anymore. The power had not just shifted, it had been decisively seized. Lawson's desperate act of violence had inadvertently served as the public announcement for an operation far grander and more devastating than anyone had imagined. The courtroom, initially a stage for a minor disciplinary hearing, had transformed into the opening act of a citywide systemic purge. The confrontation with Lawson was just the first domino. The real battle, against the hidden forces of corruption, had just begun, broadcast for the world to see. This revelation of Operation Clean Slate fundamentally altered the landscape, exposing not just a new chief, but a new era of relentless accountability. The aftermath of the courtroom revelation was a maelstrom. Chief Ward immediately launched Operation Clean Slate into high gear. Her first directive was clear reopening every single complaint against Officer Brent Lawson, along with a comprehensive review of all cases he had been involved in. This was just the start. She assembled a new internal affairs unit composed of federal agents and hand-picked officers from outside the department, all sworn to secrecy and accountability. Their mandate to systematically audit police conduct, starting with the most notorious units. The resistance was immediate and fierce. Anonymous threats started appearing on precinct walls, subtle at first, then escalating to direct warnings spray-painted on patrol cars: "Ward, go home." Snitch, the police union, a powerful entity long aligned with the old guard, publicly condemned her methods, accusing her of conducting a witch hunt and demoralizing the force. They rallied officers, encouraging a slowdown in response times and a deliberate dereliction of duty in certain neighborhoods, painting it as a protest against her federal overreach. Crime statistics, suspiciously, began to tick upwards in targeted areas. Fueled by the deliberate inaction of officers loyal to the old system, the media, initially supportive, began to report on the rising crime rates, questioning the effectiveness of her reforms. Internal sabotage became a daily occurrence. Critical evidence files mysteriously disappeared from secure locations. Digital records were corrupted. Surveillance footage from key incidents went missing. Anonymous tips to internal affairs about corrupt officers were dismissed by mid-level commanders before reaching Cassandra's new unit. These were not random acts, they were calculated. Precise blows aimed at crippling her investigation from within. Every new measure she implemented was met with an immediate, equally sophisticated countermeasure. She found herself fighting ghosts, an invisible network of loyalties and shared secrets that permeated every level of the department. One particularly egregious act of sabotage came during a crucial raid. Cassandra's unit, acting on a verified tip about a major drug trafficking operation involving several dirty cops, moved to intercept, but the information had been leaked. The targets were gone, and the raid team walked into an empty warehouse, only to be met by a barrage of flashbangs and non-lethal projectiles launched from the building's upper levels, clearly intended to disorient and humiliate them. The local news, tipped off, arrived just in time to capture the disoriented, embarrassed federal agents and officers emerging from the failed operation. A stark contrast to the triumphant image of Cassandra from the courtroom. The Union immediately capitalized, declaring it proof of her incompetence and reckless disregard for officer safety. The public support, initially overwhelming, began to waver under the constant barrage of negative press and the perceived increase in crime. Community leaders who had welcomed her now expressed concerns about instability. Political pressure mounted. The city council, heavily influenced by powerful, old money interests connected to the police union, called for an emergency session to discuss a vote of no confidence in her leadership. Petitions circulated, not just from police officers, but from concerned citizens, demanding answers about the spiraling crime and the federal intervention into their local police force. Cassandra found herself isolated. Even some of the panel members from Lawson's hearing, who had initially shown shock, now seemed to distance themselves, citing procedural irregularities and a desire to maintain departmental cohesion. Her few loyalists within the department were subjected to intense harassment and social ostracization. Their lockers were vandalized. Their families received anonymous threats. Several were even unjustly placed on administrative leave for fabricated infractions. She was being squeezed from all sides, a public narrative turning against her, an internal resistance actively undermining her and political forces maneuvering to oust her. The weight of the systemic opposition was immense, pushing her to the very precipice of what she could endure. She was fighting a phantom army, one that understood the city's underbelly far better than she did, and they were using every weapon at their disposal to ensure her clean slate initiative crumbled into dust. The city was on the brink, and her own position was more precarious than ever. The pressure on Chief Ward was immense. The city council meeting for the vote of no confidence loomed, a public spectacle designed to unseat her. The police union's campaign of fear and misinformation had taken root. The rising crime statistics, a grim testament to their orchestrated defiance. Cassandra sat in her Spartan office, a stack of sabotage case files before her. The frustration a bitter taste. Her federal contacts were pushing for a retreat, warning of irreparable damage to her career. Retreat, however, was not in her vocabulary. She was down, but not out. The public display of Lawson's arrogance and her subsequent revelation had stirred something unexpected. Not everyone within the department was rotten. A quiet, unassuming figure had been observing, working in the shadows, fueled by a simmering disgust for the systemic corruption that had been normalized. Officer Marcus Thorne, a tech specialist in the records division, often overlooked, was her unlikely ace. Thorne was a data ghost, a man whose existence was mostly confined to blinking server lights and lines of code. He had been present during the Lawson hearing, one of the many faces in the public gallery, and the visceral shock of Lawson's attack, followed by Cassandra's cold, calculated countermove, had imprinted on him. He saw a chance for real change, a chance to clean out the poison. For weeks, while the union orchestrated its slowdown and the corrupt officers deleted files, Thorne had been quietly working. He hadn't approached Cassandra directly, fearing he'd be exposed. Instead, he used an encrypted, anonymous drop. He'd been meticulously creating ghost backups of critical data, uncovering hidden servers, and most damningly, compiling a cross-reference ledger. This ledger detailed illicit financial transactions, protected call logs, and encrypted messages that linked a network of corrupt officers, not just Lawson, but several high-ranking lieutenants and captains, directly to organized crime, drug trafficking, and, most crucially, to the deliberate suppression of crime statistics in the orchestration of the current sabotage campaign. It was the blueprint of the phantom army Cassandra had been fighting. The most explosive revelation from Thorne's data was a series of encrypted communications between the police union president, a seemingly untouchable figure named Frank Delgado, and a known crime syndicate boss. These messages detailed plans to escalate specific crimes, auto thefts, street-level drug dealing, in areas where Ward's reforms were most active, creating a false narrative of Kate and justifying the vote of no confidence. It revealed how the missing evidence was systematically destroyed, how anonymous tips were funneled to specific officers to ensure they were ignored, and how loyal officers were being framed. It was the ultimate betrayal from within. Cassandra received the anonymous drop, a secure, encrypted drive containing Thorne's findings, the day before the city council vote. The sheer volume and damning nature of the evidence were overwhelming. This wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a deep, sprawling root system of corruption. She immediately recognized Thorne's meticulous work, the digital breadcrumbs he'd left. Confirming his identity as the source, she knew the risk he'd taken, the vulnerability he had exposed himself to. The city council meeting was a pressure cooker. News cameras lined the back of the chamber, reporters clutched microphones, and the public gallery was packed with anxious citizens and stony-faced police union members. Mayor Thompson, visibly nervous, began the proceedings, introducing the motion for the vote of no confidence. Union President Delgado delivered a scathing address, blaming Ward for the rise in crime and calling her a federal interloper, destroying community trust. Just as the council prepared to vote, Cassandra rose. She didn't ask for permission. She walked to the podium, her presence commanding immediate silence. She didn't speak of procedural issues or departmental pride. Instead, she held up the encrypted drive. "Mayor, council members, citizens," she began, her voice cutting through the tension. "You have heard the allegations. You have seen the orchestrated chaos. But what you haven't seen, what has been meticulously hidden from you, is the truth." With a nod to a waiting, trusted tech assistant, she projected a live feed from the drive onto the large screen behind the council. The room gasped. The first image was a ledger, clear and stark, showing transactions between high-ranking officers and known criminals. Then came encrypted call logs, then damning messages detailing the union's role in instigating crime. Every line of code, every timestamp, every name was a direct punch to the gut of the corrupt system. The face of Union President Delgado, initially smug, went white. Several council members, caught in the crosshairs of the projected evidence, squirmed in their seats. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the raw, unfiltered evidence for millions to witness. The defiant act had not just exposed a secret, it had ripped the veil from an entire conspiracy, and the city, once again, was about to be turned inside out. The power dynamic had shifted, not just subtly, but irrevocably. The projected evidence exploded across the chamber's main screen, a brutal diagram of betrayal and corruption. The room, which had been a low hum of anticipation and anxiety, erupted into a cacophony of shouts, gasps, and the frantic clicking of cameras. The ledger, stark and undeniable, detailed illicit payments from known crime figures directly into shell accounts traced back to Lieutenant Thomas Vance, Captain Evelyn Hayes, and, most damningly, to the personal accounts of Union President Frank Delgado. Call logs flashed, showing repeated, encrypted conversations between Delgado and a notorious gang leader, timestamped precisely around the period of the spontaneous crime wave. Then came the messages, explicit instructions to police dispatchers to delay responses in specific neighborhoods, directives to patrol officers to ignore minor infractions that would quickly escalate into major crimes, all designed to destabilize Chief Ward's tenure. Union President Delgado, who had been sneering just moments before, turned ashen. His jaw hung slack, his eyes fixated on the screen. As if mesmerized by his own public execution, the smugness vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. Several council members, their names briefly flashing on the screen as recipients of campaign donations from shell corporations linked to the criminal enterprises, visibly recoiled, their faces contorting in a mixture of shock and self-preservation. One councilman even tried to stand, stumbling backwards, whispering impossible. The live television feed, which had already cut away from the studio to focus on the council meeting, captured every raw, unscripted moment. The faces of the public in the gallery shifted from confusion to outrage, then to a collective roar. Chants of "lock them up" and "justice for the city" began to rise, drowning out the frantic whispers of the politicians. This wasn't just a political debate, it was a public shaming, a raw unveiling of the darkness that had festered at the heart of their city's institutions. Cassandra stood firm at the podium, her voice now calm, cutting through the escalating chaos with the precision of a surgeon. "This is not a witch hunt," she stated, her words resonating with undeniable authority. "This is a surgical strike. Officer Thorne's work, which you are witnessing, reveals a meticulously orchestrated campaign to undermine my office, to discredit reform, and to line the pockets of those sworn to protect this city by actively enabling and exploiting its criminal element." She pointed a finger directly at Delgado, who flinched. "Mr. Delgado, your union, under your leadership, became a criminal enterprise, not a protector of officers. You endangered the very citizens you claimed to serve, all for personal gain and to preserve a corrupt status quo." Delgado, finding a sliver of his old bluster, tried to shout, "This is slander fabricated a federal smear campaign." But his voice cracked, thin and unconvincing against the backdrop of the damning evidence scrolling across the screen and the furious shouts from the gallery. Cassandra didn't let him recover. "Fabricated, Mr. Delgado. These are encrypted messages from your own secure servers, backed up and verified. These are financial transactions, documented and cross-referenced by federal forensic accountants. Are you suggesting that the Department of Justice, the FBI, and countless hours of meticulous investigation are all fabricating this?" Her rhetorical question hung heavy in the air, a hammer blow to his credibility. Mayor Thompson, his face a mask of disbelief and fear, finally pounded his gavel, trying to restore order to the spiraling meeting. "Order, order," in the chamber. His voice was lost in the tumult. The camera crews, sensing the historic magnitude of the moment, pushed closer, lenses zooming in on Delgado's crumbling facade, then on the stunned faces of the implicated council members. The anchors on the live feed, struggling to keep up, could only repeat variations of unprecedented, shocking, and breaking. Social media was now a wildfire, fueled by the direct, irrefutable evidence, clips of the ledger, the call logs, and Delgado's panicked face were being shared millions of times per second. Suddenly, a group of federal agents, who had been waiting discreetly in the wings, entered the chamber. They moved with swift, silent purpose, their presence a chilling punctuation mark to Cassandra's revelations. Their target was clear. 2 agents moved directly towards Delgado. He tried to bolt, a desperate, pathetic lunge towards the exit, but he was quickly apprehended, his arms twisted behind his back. The snap of handcuffs echoed in the still chaotic room. "Frank Delgado, you are under arrest," one of the agents stated, his voice calm, projecting just enough to be heard over the renewed roar of the crowd. "For conspiracy to commit racketeering, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of criminal conspiracy." Then, a second team of agents moved toward Captain Hayes and Lieutenant Vance, both of whom sat frozen in their seats, their faces drained of color. They too were handcuffed and escorted out, the public gallery erupting in cheers. The shift was immediate, tangible. The power had not just shifted, it had violently, irrevocably transferred. The council meeting, intended to dismantle Chief Ward's authority, had instead become the public theater for the dismantling of the corrupt system itself. The tide had turned, swiftly and decisively. Before the eyes of a shocked nation, the confrontation had culminated in real, Immediate consequences. The arrest sent shockwaves through the city council chamber and beyond. The cacophony of shouts morphed into a stunned silence as Frank Delgado, Captain Hayes, and Lieutenant Vance were led away in handcuffs, their faces grim masks of defeat. The federal agents, efficient and professional, secured the electronic evidence and began moving through the chamber, quietly serving subpoenas to other individuals whose names had appeared on Thorne's digital ledger. The sheer scale of the corruption became sickeningly clear. Mayor Thompson, visibly shaken, finally regained his composure. His initial attempts to control the meeting had been futile, but now, with the implicated figures removed, a new, decisive energy filled the room. He pounded his gavel, a clear, ringing sound this time. Order, order. This council meeting is suspended indefinitely. We will reconvene only to address the full implications of this evidence in the subsequent federal investigation. He looked directly at Chief Ward, his eyes no longer nervous, but filled with a dawning respect. Chief Ward, the city stands with you. The vote of no confidence is rescinded, effective immediately. You have the full backing of my office and this administration to root out every last vestige of this criminal enterprise. The public gallery erupted once more, this time in thunderous applause. The chants of Chief Ward, echoed through the chamber. Outside, the scene was even more chaotic. News vans swarmed the building, reporters shouting into microphones, live crosstalks dominating every channel. News anchors, initially struggling to comprehend the live drama, now spoke with grave authority about the unprecedented fall of a corrupt police union and the dawn of a new era of accountability. Social media was a torrent of support for Chief Ward, hashtagging her name, celebrating her defiance. The tide had not just turned, it had become a tsunami within minutes. The police department itself began to feel the tremors. News of the arrests, broadcast live on every patrol car's digital display, spread like wildfire. The slowdown tactics instantly ceased. Officers who had been deliberately unresponsive suddenly were reported for duty, their movements stiff, wary, the rank and file, many of whom had been genuinely bewildered or coerced by the union's agenda, watched in stunned silence as the foundation of their world crumbled. The phantom army, now exposed, was revealed to be a far smaller, albeit deeply entrenched, network of compromised individuals, whose power relied on secrecy and intimidation. With secrecy shattered, so too was their grip. Cassandra did not linger in the council chamber. She issued immediate, unequivocal directives from her secure mobile command unit outside. Every officer connected, however tangentially, to the exposed network was to be placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Internal affairs units across the city were purged, their corrupt members arrested or suspended. Federal agents, working under Cassandra's command, fanned out to precincts, securing evidence, interviewing officers, and initiating the process of a comprehensive top-to-bottom audit. The ripple effect extended beyond the police force. Political allies of Delgado, city officials who had quietly benefited from the corruption, suddenly found themselves under intense scrutiny. District attorneys announced immediate reviews of past cases involving the arrested officers. Even the city's influential old guard, who had tacitly supported the union for years, found their positions precarious, their public statements now carefully worded, devoid of their previous bluster. The public backlash against the union was swift and unforgiving. Protests, once aimed at police brutality, now focused on rooting out systemic corruption, demanding full transparency and accountability. The narrative shifted from anti-police sentiment to a powerful call for police reform, led by a chief who had just proven her unwavering commitment to it. The immediate aftermath solidified Cassandra's position beyond doubt. Her bold, public act of defiance, aided by the unexpected twist of Thorne's data, had not just exposed the antagonist, it had crippled the entire corrupt apparatus. The arrests were just the initial skirmish. The true battle, the long, arduous process of rebuilding trust and integrity, had just begun. But now she held the reins, armed with irrefutable evidence and the unwavering support of a public hungry for justice. The balance of power had irrevocably tipped, leaving the remnants of the old guard scrambling for survival, while the vision of a truly clean slate began to take shape. The immediate aftermath of the courthouse exposé was a whirlwind Chief Cassandra Ward expertly navigated. She held a series of rapid-fire press conferences, not from the traditional police headquarters, but from a temporary office set up in a civic center, symbolically distancing herself from the compromised institution. Her message was clear and unyielding. This is not merely about arresting bad actors. This is about dismantling a system that allowed them to flourish. This is about restoring the public's trust. Brick by painful brick, she leveraged the unprecedented public momentum. Riding the wave of outrage, she immediately pushed for an emergency city council ordinance, bypassing the usual legislative hurdles. This Police Accountability and Transparency Act included mandatory body cameras for all officers, independent civilian review boards with subpoena power, and most controversially, a radical restructuring of the police union's collective bargaining rights, specifically stripping them of their ability to negotiate over disciplinary procedures. The council, cowed by the public furor and the recent arrests, passed it with surprising speed. Internally, Cassandra launched a sweeping purge. The federal agents, now working openly alongside her, executed dozens more warrants. Officers whose names appeared on Thorne's ledger or were implicated in the web of illegal activities were arrested or placed on immediate, indefinite administrative leave. The sheer volume of suspensions crippled several units, but Cassandra, anticipating this, had already secured additional federal support and brought in retired, untainted officers to fill critical gaps. The department, once a bastion of impenetrable solidarity, became a volatile, uncertain landscape. The arrested officers, facing severe federal charges and the undeniable evidence from Thorne's data, began to cooperate. Their testimonies, a cascade of confessions and accusations, peeled back layer after layer of corruption. It wasn't just about drug deals and delayed responses. The investigations revealed a vast network of kickbacks from city contracts, specifically involving construction permits and zoning variances. Influential real estate developers and construction magnates had been funneling illicit payments through shell corporations, facilitated by corrupt police officials who ensured permits were fast-tracked, inspections overlooked, and protests against questionable projects violently suppressed. This exposed a deeper, more insidious antagonist, the powerful old money interests in the city, the very families and corporations that had, for decades, silently controlled the city's political and economic landscape. Their names, once whispered in hushed tones, now began to appear in federal indictments. The police force, under Delgado's leadership, had simply been their blunt instrument, their enforcers. The financial trails led directly to prominent figures, including a senior state senator, Marcus Sterling, whose family owned large tracts of undeveloped land targeted for massive, controversial development projects. Sterling, a seemingly untouchable pillar of the community, had been a vocal critic of Ward's radical reforms. Now, his connection to the very system she was dismantling became undeniable. The sheer scale of the financial crime, running into hundreds of millions, dwarfed the street-level corruption that had previously dominated headlines. The resistance, initially decentralized, began to coalesce. Senator Sterling, a master of political maneuvering, initiated a well-funded counteroffensive. His legal team launched a barrage of lawsuits challenging the new Police Accountability and Transparency Act, arguing federal overreach and violations of officer rights. He began a sophisticated media campaign, subtly shifting the narrative from police corruption to federal government infringing on local autonomy and destroying police effectiveness. Anonymous op-eds appeared in national newspapers, criticizing Ward's draconian measures and predicting a complete breakdown of law and order. Cassandra, however, had anticipated this. She responded with transparency, Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every indictment was meticulously documented and then released to the public. Albeit with necessary redactions for ongoing investigations, she held public forums, explaining the intricate web of corruption, connecting the dots between police misconduct, dirty politicians, and powerful business interests. Her direct, uncompromising approach resonated with the working-class citizens who had long felt marginalized and exploited. Yet, the fight was far from over. Sterling's legal challenges, though ethically shaky, tied up the new reforms in court, his media campaign, while failing to fully discredit Ward, began to sow seeds of doubt among some segments of the public. The deeper the investigation delved, the more powerful and entrenched the remaining antagonist became. The stakes had escalated from police accountability to a war for the very soul of the city, a battle against forces far more elusive and politically connected than a street cop like Lawson. The true scale of the fight, involving the city's powerful elite, was now laid bare. Senator Marcus Sterling escalated his counteroffensive. His legal team filed an injunction against the Police Accountability and Transparency Act, arguing it was an unconstitutional overreach of mayoral and chief executive powers. Simultaneously, his well-oiled public relations machine flooded local and national airwaves with talk show appearances and strategically placed op-eds, framing Chief Ward as a dangerous radical undermining law enforcement. The narrative was simple. Ward's reforms were causing the city to spiral into chaos, jeopardizing public safety for ideological purity. A critical preliminary hearing on the injunction was set for the following week, a public forum where Sterling intended to deliver the final blow to Ward's reforms. Cassandra knew this hearing was the ultimate trap. Sterling was not just fighting for his freedom, he was fighting for the survival of the old system he embodied. She needed more than indictments, she needed undeniable public proof that linked him directly and irrevocably to the deepest layers of corruption. Her team, working tirelessly with federal investigators, had compiled a mountain of circumstantial evidence, but the direct, irrefutable link to Sterling remained elusive. He was too careful, too insulated. Then, a breakthrough. Officer Marcus Thorne, the digital ghost, had been quietly pursuing a hunch. He had identified a complex, highly encrypted data server, operating independently of the police department's main network, hidden deep within the city's municipal infrastructure. This wasn't just a backup, it was a private, shadow network, used for the most sensitive and illicit communications. Accessing it was a monumental task. But Thorne, fueled by a quiet fury against the system that had oppressed him and his community, finally cracked it. The contents of the shadow server were devastating. It contained meticulously kept ledgers of illicit payments, not from street criminals, but from dozens of high-profile businesses, all funneled directly to Senator Sterling's private numbered accounts in offshore banks. Even more damning were the direct orders from Sterling, not through intermediaries, but in his own coded language, instructing corrupt police officials on how to suppress dissent, manipulate zoning regulations, and facilitate specific land deals. It revealed Sterling as the architect of the corruption, not merely a beneficiary. The final explosive piece of evidence was a series of video recordings from hidden cameras, showing Sterling personally meeting with the now-arrested former Union President Delgado and other key corrupt officers, exchanging briefcases and discussing operational details. The audio was pristine, the faces unmistakable. This was the undisputed proof, the final nail in the coffin of the old regime. The day of the injunction hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, a palpable tension in the air. Senator Sterling, flanked by a phalanx of expensive lawyers, exuded an air of confident superiority, addressing the cameras with practiced ease. Chief Ward arrived, calm and collected, taking her seat opposite him. The hearing began with Sterling's lead counsel presenting their arguments, painting a picture of Ward as a reckless administrator and her reforms as unconstitutional power grabs. When it was Cassandra's turn to present her defense, she walked directly to the projection screen, bypassing the witness stand. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady, The senator's counsel argues about constitutional overreach. I argue about criminal conspiracy. They talk about local autonomy. I talk about systemic betrayal. And now I will show you why. With a single decisive command, Thorne, working from a secure location, activated the projection. The screen flickered, then resolved into a series of images and video clips. The first was a zoomed-in shot of Sterling's personal offshore account, a staggering balance reflecting millions in illicit funds. Then came the coded communications, rapidly deciphered and displayed, revealing direct orders for police suppression of specific community protests against Sterling's development projects. Then came the video. The room gasped. Senator Sterling, on screen, appeared to age 20 years in a matter of seconds. The hidden camera footage played, showing him, smiling, shaking hands, and exchanging briefcases with Delgado and the other arrested officers. The audio, clear and damning, played his own voice discussing enforcement dividends and expedited land acquisitions. The courtroom erupted. Sterling's lawyer scrambled, shouting objections. But the judge, his face grim, silenced them with a sharp bang of his gavel. The live broadcast captured Sterling's face, his confident smirk dissolving into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He was outmaneuvered, he was exposed, he was finished. Federal agents, who had been strategically placed throughout the courtroom, moved swiftly and silently. They approached Sterling, who sagged in his chair, utterly defeated. Senator Sterling, an agent stated, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, and public corruption. Sterling offered no resistance. As he was led away, his face a ghostly white, the cheers from the public gallery were deafening. Chief Cassandra Ward stood alone at the front of the courtroom, her image now projected on the screen behind her, superimposed over the damning evidence. She was no longer just the chief. She was the defiant face of true justice, a powerful symbol of resistance against a system that had long believed itself untouchable. The final showdown had ended in a decisive, public victory, and the city finally saw its opportunity for a clean slate.